Hey guys, welcome back. So we're continuing with more Immortal Thor, where now we're starting to see both Loki and Dario Agger change Thor's history, which is something that we've been teased with throughout this entire series. So let's talk about it. But first, if you're enjoying these videos, make sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so coming back, we're initially given a glimpse at a comic that's being read by Dario Agger, who, like we talked about earlier in this series, acquired the rights to Thor's legend, and he's soon going to be making some of his own changes in the near future, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But while he's reading this comic, we go over to Loki and Thor, where right now the two of them are preparing for a bit of story time themselves, because in our last talk, when Thor in the all-new Thor Corps went up against Thanos, just before Thanos left, he told Thor that he was only doing what he was bid to do, under the command of his brother, Utgard Loki, who's working alongside Thor's mother, Gia, which now has created the instance to where Thor needs to get some answers. So to start, Thor needs to revisit some really old memories, but instead of just trying to tell the story again, Loki prepares a magic fire so that the two of them can actually relive this story, which is pretty crazy to see because it ends up taking us to a specific issue of Thor Volume 1, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But as they get ready, Loki gives Thor a bit of a disclaimer by telling him if he relives this story that it's possible that he could die in it too, and how the retelling of this story may not go the same way that Thor remembers. So to relive this journey into mystery, so to speak, it could be just as deadly, if not deadlier. But nonetheless, Thor needs to recall these old memories of Utgard that he initially learned in the ancient days of his ancient travels, if he's going to figure out how to get to his mother and confront her. And for Thor, these memories are so distant that he can't just trust his recollection, and he wants to make sure, with him and Loki reliving this memory, that it's actually the truth, instead of some trick or any sort of lies. So of course Loki gives the Loki answer, because he's like, what is truth? Even a true tale may twist and turn. It is a thing alive. And the truth it reveals may be that you are dead. Which right there just reminds me of the ending to Tales from the Hood, where those guys were being told a story only to find out that they were dead the whole time. Yeah, the ending of that movie messed me up, and I'm talking about the original one. But what this does right here for Thor and Loki, it brings back around the whole "do you trust me" question that Loki asked back in issue 2. Though it's not like Loki asks all those same questions again, but instead he tells Thor, I am also your enemy, and I am the Loki who will kill you. Which then has Thor respond, I believe it, Loki. You are my enemy, and I trust you to be so. Because for Thor, he also understands that he needs this to be as real as possible, so it's as accurate as possible. Because if Loki were to coddle him and make this some kind of fairy tale, that lie could do more harm than good. So with hearing this, Loki's pretty much like, alright, that's enough talking, let's get it. To where next, Loki begins with the magic words, once upon a time. As we see Loki revert back to a day when he looked less like Michael Jackson and more like Robbie Amell. But also within this reliving of this story, Thor's taken back to this time as well, but of course in his case he looks very much the same, since he ages super slow, in addition to his recent return to his classic outfit. So essentially the Thor we see in this story, he looks much like the Thor we've seen recently. But back at this time, the main difference between who Thor was and who he is now is the lessons that he learned in humility. So as modern day Thor is revisiting this moment where he's teasing Loki because he doesn't want to cross this mysterious bridge that Odin told them never to cross, it has present day Thor like, man, was I that bad? And Loki just tells him, mostly, sometimes better, sometimes worse, it was all before you learned humility. Which for Thor, between now and then, he's experienced a lot of lessons in humility. But also with the conversation of Thor's humility, we find ourselves creeping into a specific time in Thor Volume 1, issue 272. But right now in the present, Thor just tells Loki that he regrets treating him the way that he did. So Loki looks to the side for a second and he says, we all have regrets. But back to the tale, which now takes them back to the memory of crossing this mysterious bridge that seemingly popped up out of nowhere that Odin told them never to travel. And at the time, Thor saw this as more the reason of why they should cross it. Because back then, Thor was just like, this bridge wasn't here yesterday. It's here now, but it might be gone tomorrow. So we have to check it out. Which, I mean, when you put it like that, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, it makes sense. But as they're walking, their path suddenly turns into a forest, where they find themselves approaching a gate, which again has classic Thor like, don't you want to see what's behind that gate? while Loki's still trying to figure out where this forest came from. Cause contrary to the way that Thor sees this, which for Thor was just an opportunity for a new adventure, but for Loki this looked like something that was going to be one adventure too many. And with the two of them going back and forth, it comes to a point where Thor tells Loki, "This is no mere adventure, this is myth. There are times when the spinners of fate's threads weave great tales for us." And shortly after that they end up going in the gate. But what Thor said at this time about the spinners of fate's threads weaving these great tales, I want you guys to keep that in mind whenever we go back to present day Loki or Dario Agger, as far as the storytelling that we see them do in the present, as well as in the near future. But it's right here as Thor and Loki make their way forward into this magic forest that now takes us into Thor issue 272, where even back at this time, the memory that we see both Thor and Loki reliving, it was also being told as a story in Thor issue 272. Because back at the time, Thor saw this kid named Joey getting bullied, so he dropped down to intervene. So with Thor showing up, the bully ran away, and Joey was like, "Man, I wish I was big enough to chase him off by myself," which is what then led Thor to telling this story that started out with him and Loki in a magic forest, making their way to a weird looking cave that wasn't quite a cave, so on and so forth. And we'll talk more about some of the comparisons after we go over what happens in this version of the story. Cause as Thor and Loki continue to make their way in this magic forest, they see what looks to be a cave up ahead, so Thor's like, "Hey, we can take shelter in there before they find something to eat," cause they're both hungry at this point. And Loki recalls at this time that he was just like, yes, or, hear me out, we could keep walking. Cause Loki was just like, "I suddenly lost my appetite. I don't want to go in there." But as the story goes, they made their way inside, only to find a hall with 5 tunnels, and the walls of this cave felt very much like a hide or leather. But suddenly, in what they thought to be an earthquake turned out to be the whole cave rising into the air. It wasn't until here where Thor and Loki realized that they'd walked into this giant's glove, and this giant was much larger than the giants they've seen before. Because Loki even tells Thor, "I was born to giants, but that's a giant giant." Like, "Oh, you a giant." And before introducing himself, the giant tells the two of them to speak up, because to him, they're just a couple of gnats just buzzing. So Thor more or less asks this giant what's his name, and the giant tells them, "In truth, I have not needed a name until just this moment. Call me Skymir. I make Skymir my name." Which at first has Loki like, okay, now this guy is giant size, slow. But Skymir goes on to say that he has food in his bag for them, which for someone like Skymir is just a morsel to him, but in proportion it's a feast to two of these guys. So Skymir sets the bag down, and he tells them the bag is already open, all they gotta do is loosen the knot. It's something that a child could do. So Skymir leaves them with the bag, and he tells them that he's gonna take a nap, cause after this he's gonna finish his journey home. And when he does, he lets them know that they're more than welcome to join him, because he's sure that his king will bestow many royal treasures upon such tiny ambassadors. And just like that, he dozes off. But as both Thor and Loki are attempting to open this bag by untying this knot, neither one of them can get it off. Loki's magic's not doing enough, and Thor ain't strong enough. So your not so humble Thor at the time saw this as a trick. So he climbed up on the top of Skymir's head, getting ready to strike him. But as Thor's doing this, reliving this moment, present day Thor is saying, "This is no longer who I am. Not this, not this." But for present day Thor to get the answers that he seeks, he must continue the story. So as it would go, Thor strikes Skymir on the head, and all it does is wake him up, with Skymir believing that it was just a leaf or a tiny acorn that fell on his head. Which right here with Thor was him reliving a very humbling moment, because he was trying to bring the thunder down. And the original story was very similar, though much like modern day Loki explained, it's not a one-to-one telling of what one may remember, because as even Thor mentioned at one point, stories themselves are tricksters. But as the story went, Skymir told Thor and Loki that they could have food out of his bag, but just don't disturb his rest with their munching. Which to me, like, the old version has Skymir sounding a bit more grumpy. Let me know what y'all think. But even so, Skymir fell fast asleep shortly after. So you're very hungry, Thor and Loki try to open the bag, and they couldn't. So that's when an outraged and very hungry Thor climbed on top of Skymir and dropped that heaven-sent thunderbolt on his head, only for Skymir to wake up thinking that a leaf or a pine fell on top of him. Which again, for Thor, this was a serving of that humble express, which is pretty much the same thing we're getting in this new telling of the story. But as Skymir gets up, he tells them that they're much closer to his home than he thought, as he points beyond the trees saying, "Behold, Utgard Hall." Which at the time, I mean, this played out differently, before, because back then Skymir was like, "Are y'all coming with me to Utgard Hall?" And Thor said yes. So Skymir was more or less like, "Alright, y'all keep up," knowing good and well that a giant's regular pace walk is like 200-300 miles per hour to us. So at the time, Thor and Loki just followed his footprints to Utgard Hall. But with the current story that we're told, it just closes with Skymir pointing. But as it does, we go back to Dario Agger, who's reading this story in the comic, and he notices that the story is changing as he reads it, to where the next thing we see is Enchantress tell him that it's Scald magic, which refers to Loki. And she goes on to tell him, but two can play at that game. And the prize is the mighty Thor, which on one hand, I would say that's the craziest part, but to go a step further, in the real world, where you and me are, Marvel tweeted out a preview of Roxxon Thor, which is said to be coming in May, and I can only imagine what we're gonna see in a Thor story coming from Dario Agger, published by Roxxon. That's gonna be wild. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support, and for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/Dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.